And just like that, we are back and live for another episode of Fight Night Picks Kicks. But before we get into the episode, and I know everybody wants to go through the picks, we're going to do a couple of different things here today. So thanks for joining us. Just want to let you know that we're brought to you by Ringside Beer. I was excited about this one and really wanted to partner with these guys. They're offering up a great opportunity for all of the Fight Night Picks viewers. Use the promo code FNP at checkout. When you go to ringsidebeerstore.com, you get 25% off your order. They've got awesome t-shirts. I mean, I wear one just about every time. They've got cool tap handles. I've got the MMA glove tap handle. I've got the boxing glove tap handle. Awesome stuff. Ringside Beer Lager. I'm looking forward to it, so make sure you check out their website, ringsidebeerstore.com. Use the promo code FNP, and you can save 25% off your order. That's exclusive to Fight Night Picks viewers. And without further ado, let's get into this episode of Kicks.
It's time
for 15 minutes of non-stop MMA, tackling the biggest news in the sport. Head into the chat and let us know how you feel. Live from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here's your host, Craig Allen.
Ooh-wee, and we are back for another episode of Fight Night Picks Kicks, where we preview the entire fight card. We've got about 45 minutes before the first prelim between Carlos Felipe and Sergey Spivak. I'm really looking forward to this episode because there's a lot of fights that could really go either way. And I know between Matt and I, we had a couple of different picks. I will go through them quickly as I move the old Ringside Beer tap handle. So we disagreed on 1, 2, 3 fights on this card. It'll be interesting to see how this whole card unfolds because we have some great fights at flyweight, a division that didn't get some shine maybe a couple of years ago. We were worried that, it might be on the way out. But nonetheless, we get some great fights here. A really good debut between Amir Al-bazi and Malcolm Gordon. That's the fight that I'm looking to the most, really. I mean, I think that's a great one there. So, Sean Scott saying thoughts on Duffy fight. It wasn't covered in the breakdowns. We covered that one extensively. I'll get into that one. Some of the fights, for some reason, weren't popping up in the playlist. I had a few different people telling me that it was kind of tough to find. Which one was it? Going through here. Brett Johns and Montel Jackson. Took me a second there. So that's kind of the deal there. I don't know what the scoop was with the good old YouTubes, but we will continue on down through. So Ace of Sports saying, who do you think Luana can pull off the win against Lipski? That's the fight that's probably the biggest coin toss on this card. I'm sure somebody's going to rip me in the comments due to the fact that we picked Molly McCann to beat Tyler Santos, but hey, sometimes that kind of stuff happens. It wasn't our best week last week. On the Hooker Poirier card, 8-2. On UFC 251, I went 11-2. Matt went 10-3. And then on Wednesday night, we laid an egg. I went 6-5. Matt went 7-4. So we ended up, so there. Kyle Kelly saying, underrated fight card, love it. Should be a good night of action. I agree with you as well. Mr. G is saying confident picks. Alvarez, Spivak, Figueiredo, and Jackson. I see a lot of people picking Alvarez. So why don't we just get right into it? We'll start from the bottom. We'll go all the way up through the card. And it should be a good one. Trovelin joining us as always. Just about every week you're tuned in. I appreciate you, man. And it could happen 21. A good follow over on the Instagrams saying you win some, you lose some. And Go Skittle saying nobody did all that great on Wednesday. Well, we got absolutely obliterated in the comments. But, I'm just going to keep coming back every single time. You can beat me up, and we'll see what happens. Brandon Gaines saying this is a tough fight card for finishes. Any fights you don't see going the distance. All right. With that, we'll get into it. First fight on this card, Boomskis. I'm not going off of just that fight card that I make. We're going to go through every single one of them individually. So, Carlos Felipe making his UFC debut. He got cut from the UFC right after he signed, tested positive with USADA, got a 2-year suspension. He said it was, fat burners, caffeine pills. Pretty sure it was stanozolol. So that's a tough one there. Taking on Sergey Spivak, and it's an interesting one because Sergey Spivak, what he's good at, forward pressure, taking the fight to the ground, might get a little bit happy with his hands, but we'll see what happens there in terms of that fight. I mean, Carlos Felipe, for what it's worth, you can go back and watch the tape. There's not a lot of it, but when you do see it, he's gotten pushed up against the cage before. He's also unleashed his hands, and that's one of those things. He's a guy that's still young at 25, but he's been out of competition for quite some time. If you look over at the odds, this is the fight that's had the biggest swing in odds. Sergey Spivak's line has changed 48%, now favoring him. He's almost a minus 200, open as a plus 110 underdog. They were pretty much coming out here around pick'em odds when it came out. So interesting there. Let's hit into the chat, see what you guys are thinking. Drew Cliff saying, don't feel bad. I got all the main card fights except for Cater wrong. It could happen 21 saying, I think Felipe gets the finish. Kicks Good saying Spivak. Ace of Sports saying Spivak, and so on and so forth. I'm going to stick with the pick of Spivak. This is a guy that's a master of sport in Sambo. He also has a judo background. I think that Spivak's going to be able to push the pace. Felipe, for what it's worth, in an interview said that he was training at home, and you could see his home setup. He had a couple of heavyweights training with him, which is fine. But Sergey Spivak's been there against some good competition. The Marcin Tabora loss is a tough one. The loss to Wald Harris is a tough one too. You know that chin can get exposed. But the big win is the Tai Tuivasa one, where you just keep mustering up an effort. And Tai Tuivasa, maybe not the highest of fight IQs. And that's easy for me to say, oversimplification, but I think Spivak's going to be able to get the win in this one. So going with Spivak to get the win over Carlos Felipe. Hopefully you like the graphics. Let me know what you're thinking in terms of that one. It seems like the majority are going to go with Spivak here. Martial arts fans saying Spivak. Alfie saying Spivak. We continue. Davi Hamos, Arman Zarukian. This is an interesting one because Davi Hamos, ADCC world champion, BJJ black belt. This guy can really get it done on the ground. And if you look at his, competition that he's faced in the UFC, it's been quite high. And for Arman Zarukian, really top prospect coming into the UFC, gets somewhat of a short draw against Islam Makhachev, which is a fight that obviously not a lot of people thought he was going to win. And then he comes out here and looks amazing. Now he lost, but he gained a lot of stock, especially for a young guy like that, to get a good exposure against a really good fighter. He comes out, beats Olivier Aubert-Mercier, who is no longer in the UFC. He had some really tough fights as well when he was there, but it was a good shot for Arman Zarukian. And based off of those 2-1s, he's coming in here around a 2-1 favorite over Davi Hamos. But for Hamos, like the win over Grutzmacher is a big one. The win over Nick Hines a big one. Then he submits John Gunther. He was a minus 1,100 favorite. Then he beats Austin Hubbard. That's a pretty good one. And then he loses to Islam Makhachev. So former common opponents in that one. Davi Hamos, it's going to be the pressure. It's going to be the groundwork. It's going to be the submission abilities. The trouble there is I just don't see Davi Hamos winning that one. Arman Zarukian, a 16% slide towards him in terms of being a favorite. He opened as a minus 230. Then it went up around, minus 190 or so. Now he's a minus 225 favorite to get the win over Davi Hamos. And I think a really good point being made in the chat right now is Danny D saying going to be lots of high-level scrambles and sub-attempts. I think so too. This is a really fun one. Mr. G Astro saying coin toss of a fight, but I'll take my chances on Hamos. King Crab saying Arman all day. And we continue on. Now, producer Henny Boy saying, does this start at 2 p.m. or 3 p.m.? I don't know what time zone you're in, so that's kind of tough. But it starts at 6 p.m. Atlantic, so 5 p.m. Eastern is when those prelims start. Low Tier God saying Spivak. PST. I'm going to have a hard time trying to work in that. Let's see. Sustainable Man saying Arman all day. And we continue on. Most guys going with Arman Zarukian to get the win. So I'm going to stick with Zarukian as well. That's one that Matt and I both picked. So to recap, we both picked Spivak to win. We both picked Arman Zarukian to win. Here's where our picks switched. Malcolm Gordon's taking on Amir Al-bazi. This is the fight that I'm most looking forward to on this card. I know I sound like I'm crazy, but Malcolm Gordon, former TKO champ, a guy that's fought good competition in his last couple, and Amir Al-bazi, who's been fighting some good guys, whether it's with Brave or some different organizations that he's been with. Now, he fought at 35 for a while. He's moved down to 25, and he's been at 25 steady for the last 4 or 5 fights. I can't remember exactly how many it's been. I think it's 5. But Amir Al-bazi, so far, if you want to point to a loss that he's had recently, it's to Jose Shorty Torres, somebody that you might be familiar with from his time in the UFC. It was a back-and-forth fight. They, give one to take one, this and that. And I see everybody in the chat right now. MMA picks saying Gordon, Toast saying Gordon by sub. That's a tough one, Toast. I don't know if I go Gordon by sub. Who else do we have? Kicks Good saying tough fight to pick, leaning Gordon. Sustainable Man saying Malcolm X. So let's get into the kind of breakdown and the nuts and bolts of this fight. Because for you to say that Amir Al-bazi is going to get a win by submission, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Malcolm Gordon to get the win by submission, because Amir Al-bazi is an adept fighter on the ground. That much is true. He can get himself in a top position. He can really impose his will when he's on the ground with a lot of guys. You can see it with his time at 35. I mean, he was a champion in some of the different smaller organizations that he fought with. He trains out of London Shoot Fighters, so you know that the game on the feet is going to be there. Malcolm Gordon, though, is one of those guys that, I mean, it's like you never heard of him and boom, here he is. So let's kind of talk about what Malcolm Gordon's good at, because he's good on the back foot. He can jab. He can switch stances. If you really pressure him, he's had a hard time. If you want to point back to one of his losses from like 3 years ago, that was one where maybe if Amir Al-bazi fights the same way that Dimitri Vardenberg fought, who was 11-7 at the time, maybe that's how he wins, because Vardenberg was throwing combos, just left, right, and center, tossing in a nice leg kick at the end of it. But again, the trouble is that was almost 4 years ago. Since then, Malcolm Gordon went over Michael Jordan, MJ, Jordan with the slam, Jordan Graham, James Mancini, and Yoni Sherbatov, a guy who we hold in really high regard with Fight Night Picks. He was on The Ultimate Fighter, lost to Eric Shelton. That's a tough one, but Malcolm Gordon really put it on him after he got hurt in that fight. So it should be a good one. I know Sustainable Man saying they both get dropped. I see a stand-up war. I do as well. And for all of those reasons, I think Malcolm Gordon's going to be able to get the win. I know Matt picked Amir Al-bazi in this one. Toast saying the only thing is that Gordon's chin is suspect. I know, like, Yoni Sherbatov caught him. They threw hands. It was Hook City, Roy Jones Jr., and Gordon just kind of had the wherewithal to push the fight against the cage, take him down. He hurt him when he took him down, and Gordon got the win there. I think Gordon's going to win. This fight's a really close one, and if you look in terms of the odds over in Best Fight Odds, if I average them out, Malcolm Gordon's the underdog at plus 120, Amir Al-bazi minus 145 or so. So that's kind of where those guys are sitting. I think that's a great fight, and you can't miss that one. Sometimes these early prelims, when you get a flyweight debut, it's one that a lot of people might not get excited about. It's one that you definitely have to watch. So Malcolm Gordon, Amir Al-bazi, that's a great one. King Crab saying Fight Night Malcolm Al-bazi. I mean, Mukhar Hussein saying Amir no chin Al-bazi. I don't know about that, but it's a good one. Uji Alexander saying staying away from this one. That's fair. There's one fight on this card that I'm going to say stay away from it. I threw it in the comments that stay away with it from a 10-foot pole, or with a 10-foot pole. But yeah, I've got Gordon Trovelin saying it's good underdog pick. We'll see what happens. Moving on. Brett Johns, Montel Jackson. This fight is a strange one because you'd think just with the eye test, Brett Johns at one point was ranked, and I mean, he's fought top competition. His 2 losses in the UFC, Aljamain Sterling, Pedro Munoz, 2 of the best guys at bantamweight, comes off of those 2 losses and gets a big win over Tony Gravely in a back-and-forth fight where John said that he wanted to fight in a phone booth, then he wanted to say he wanted to fight Montel Jackson in a phone booth. That's not good, because Tony Gravely, good wrestler, all right hands. Montel Jackson, good hands, good use of distance, and a lot longer of a fighter. I mean, you can see it there from the graphic. He's going to have 3 inches of height. He's going to have 4.5 inches of reach, and typically he uses those quite well. So Montel Jackson, for what it's worth, a great fighter to really try and rally around. I mean, a big win over Brian Kelleher. You saw what Kelleher was able to do. He was stringing together some wins. Had that big one over Hunter Azure, and then he lost Cody Stamen. And if you look at the 2 guys after that, Andre Sukumtoth and then Felipe Claris, well, okay, but still, they're quality wins in the UFC. If I'm looking over on Tapology, out of almost 2,500 fans, 67% going with Jackson, 74% saying he's going to win by decision. And if I look over at the odds, he's a pretty big favorite, sitting around a minus 242. So it's an interesting one there. I'm going to still side with Montel Jackson. Matt did as well when we made our picks originally. It's tough with Brett Johns because you would think for him to win, probably going to want to bring it down to the ground. If I go up and look at the chat, because I'm going to pop in and out. If you want to hit us up with a super chat, A, I would appreciate it, but B, it makes it a whole heck of a lot easier for me to read it. So I'm going to rip through these quick. Ace of Sports, Marin saying Brett Johns will get the win. Trovelin saying Brett Johns all day. Trovelin picked Tyler Santos to win last week, and I didn't, so good. Maybe follow his picks. LP is saying Montel by KO. That's a pretty good one. Let's see what else. Ace of Sports saying Brett Johns is overlooked. I don't think we're totally overlooking Brett Johns. Just my 2 cents saying it's a tough one to call. It really is. It's one of the tougher ones. This card, you can do as much tape study as you want. You have a lot of fights where you have differing styles, or you have some fights that are, very similar styles. We'll get into some of those, moving forward. But in this one, taking Montel Jackson. So to recap just quick, I've got Spivak, Zarukian, Malcolm Gordon, and Montel Jackson in our first 4 fights. So let's hop back in. Jake saying sup from Seattle. Sup, dude. CW Pooch saying Figueiredo plus Dawson parlay. I like those two. And Ollie hitting us up. And Ollie's got, you have to be the biggest bantamweight fan in the world. And I think that's awesome. Moraes versus Garbrandt. I've got Moraes in that one. I talked about that in another show that's going to be coming out. Fight Night Picks Early Stoppage. Make sure you check it out. So let's continue to move along. Joel Alvarez, Joe Duffy. This is the fight where we went absolutely AWOL. And a lot of people, I know, like, if I look over on Tapology, I bet you at a 2,500 picks, overwhelming majority going with Joe Duffy. And if I look over at the odds, Joe Duffy's a really big favorite. He's one of the bigger favorites on the card. Minus 300 favorite right now. And if you look over on Tapology, out of 2,496, so I was close, 72% Duffy, 65% decision. Man, I really do think Joel Alvarez is going to win this fight. And it's tough. It really is. I went back and watched Joel Alvarez against Damir Ismagulov. And forgive me, on the pick I said that, or in the original prediction video, I said that Damir Ismagulov took down Joel Alvarez. I had Alex Georges on my mind. That's why I went with it. In that fight, Joel Alvarez got pieced up on the feet. But if you'll remember, and if you look at Joel Alvarez's record, coming into the UFC, he was a submission machine. Majority of his wins by submission, and he was getting it done early. All of a sudden, he was on the back foot. He was getting hit. He was throwing some good shots of his own. Kept his head on the center line, which is a little bit worrying. Uses the length quite well at 155, so I will say that. Devin Davis kind of hitting my point that I'm coming up to, saying everyone favors Duffy because of his win over Connor years ago. And I get it. I really get it. But that's the trouble. And I see Matthew Knapp saying Joe has times he looks amazing. Other times he looks like garbage. So it just depends on who shows up. I think Joel Alvarez in this one's a pretty good pick. And let me tell you why. Joe Duffy hasn't won a fight since 2017 over Reza Madadi. And Reza Madadi we saw with Hamzat Shemaev on Wednesday night in his corner with All Stars MMA. He does a good job of coaching there. And he's one of those kind of pioneers of the sport in that area. So I just want to say, yeah, I like Joel Alvarez in this one because if you look at Joe Duffy since he beat Reza Madadi, listen, you can say what you want about James Vick, but there was a point in time where he was stringing together a lot of good wins. He knocked out Joe Duffy. So there's that kind of a similar build and frame to a guy like Joel Alvarez, which could cause Duffy problems. Then he fought Marc Jaqcacie and lost the decision, which I get it. Joel Alvarez, though, here's the thing. Go watch Joel Alvarez's last fight where he took on a not-so-tough test, and I can say that, against Danilo Caterpillar Belluardo. And that was one of those ones where the fight went to the ground. You just kept going and going as Ray Blanket keeps asking me if I bet on the fights, and you say, I don't bet on the fight, I just talk about the favorites. Well, spoiler alert, Ray, I'm picking a big underdog here in this fight. So Joel Alvarez against Belluardo gets taken down. Belluardo lands some nice elbows at the end of the first round. And then in the second round, the fight gets back down to the ground. Now, Joel Alvarez was having success on the feet. On the mat, you could see he was trying to set things up. Longer guys like that, kind of tricky on the ground, like a guy like Neil Magny at 70. He's really tricky when he's on his back. And then Joel Alvarez, he's on his back, slides into a great spot, and gets a really nice win where he's just hammering away at Danilo Belluardo. Joe Duffy, it's just tough to try and see what you're going to get out of him in this one. I know he's trained to TriStar for the longest time. You have really good training partners. But we talked about a fighter earlier on in Olivier Aubert-Mercier who spent time there as well as H2O in Montreal. But yeah, TriStar's hit or miss these days. It's no longer just GSP and Rory McDonald running the show. So I'm going to go with Alvarez over Joe Duffy. So we'll continue on. I know that's a bit of a crazy pick. We'll have to see how it goes. I know it's not as crazy as Molly McCann, Tyler Santos. Boy, that was a bad one. But we continue on. Grant Dawson taking on Nad Narimani. Let me know. Ryan Johnson saying, can Grant Dawson get a win by knockout or by submission? If you look at Nad Narimani so far in his career, he's a tough guy to finish. He really is. He's fought some good competition on the regional scene before he came into the UFC. He has a win over Paddy the Baddy Pimblett, Liverpool's own. He hasn't fought in over a year. It's been 16 months since he last fought. This is Grant Dawson's first fight outside of the U.S. And Grant Dawson, he has a lot of decision fights on his record, but he can definitely finish them as well. Sorry, he's only had one decision in 16 fights. He can certainly finish them by submission. So he trains at a Glory MMA and Fitness. where you'll recognize some of the cornermen, the James Krauses, the Zach Cummings, Devontae Smith, so on and so forth. Quality guys. And you can see it in his fights, and it might come as a surprise. And I know in the graphic I've got them both at 45. It's catchweight fight at 150. Grant Dawson, if you'll remember in his last one against Derek Minner, missed weight badly. It wasn't good. So this one at 50, you should have, you know, two fairly fresh guys, and you're going to get a good fight between these two. But again, the trouble is with a guy like Narimani, if you look at it over his entire career, let's look at his wins. So he's got 2 wins by knockout, 5 wins by submission, 5 by decision, 1 loss by knockout. Same for both these guys. Never been submitted. Neither one of them have been submitted. If you watched a Grant Dawson fight, you know how good of a submission artist he is at 45. At 50, it's going to translate here. Devin Brown saying Dawson going to win by ground and pound stoppage. Ollie's saying Grant Dawson is enormous for the weight class. Just my 2 cents. I like Dawson here. I agree with you. King Crab going with Dawson. Just about everybody's going with Dawson here. I am as well. I don't see a way that Narimani is going to beat Grant Dawson personally. And I know, like I talked about the level of competition that he's faced on the regional scene. And while it is good, and he's looked good in the UFC, he has. The tough one is, you know, you're going Paddy Pimblett, then Khalid Taha. I mean, that's a little bit of a drop in competition. Anderson Dos Santos, all right, but that was, you know, a year and a half ago. Then he fights Mike Grundy last spring. We haven't seen him since. He got knocked out in the second round. Slight favorite in that one. He was injured. He was supposed to fight Nick Lentz earlier on in the spring. And yeah, I really like Grant Dawson in this fight for a lot of different reasons. He's really looked good at 45. He looks like a dark horse to become, you know, an up-and-coming contender. And that's a division that can certainly use him. And it's a really strong one as well, especially what you saw on Wednesday night between Kattar and Ige. So I'm going to go with Dawson in this one. Seems like the overwhelming majority of you following along in the chat are going with him as well. Nad played spoiler against Paddy, but he doesn't have that Dawson level wrestling. That's the thing too. You know, Paddy Pimblett's weird with his setups for submissions. I mean, if you want to go back and watch the Alexis Svitas fight, that's one for sure. But we'll move on. And Devin Brown saying Roman Dolidze scares me only because of the layoff. The layoff, the USADA suspension, there's a lot of question marks. You got to scratch your head when you're looking at Roman Dolidze and Hadis Ibragimov. If you look at Ibragimov, like, I don't know what to say that he's done well in the UFC. It's tough. I mean, he's lost his first 2. He was undefeated coming in and won global champ. A lot of hype around him, just like old Roman Bogota from last weekend. Old knee to the downed opponent and knee to the nuts. But if I'm looking at this one, over on Tapology, to 2,557 voters, 87% going Dolidze, 84% saying he's going to win by knockout. And over with the odds makers, I mean, Dolidze opened a minus 180 favorite. Now he's sitting around a minus 160. I think that's a pretty good opportunity if you're going to go with a guy like that. And first, last, thanks for joining us. You're always here with Fight Night Picks. You're an OG, and I appreciate you. Toast saying Ibragimov being a dog, had to throw some money on him. That's tough. I mean, I really do think so. Xavier Joker going back with the Narimani saying he's a real test for Dawson. I agree. But in this one, I mean, Roman Dolidze, let's walk through him. Maybe you're not familiar with him. Undefeated, out of Georgia, trains with some really good kickboxers. So that's going to be one of those things where you train with a guy that can kind of match the speed and the game plan of Hadis Ibragimov. And Ibragimov, we haven't seen what he's done well in the regional scene translate to the UFC. I know he's a master of sport, and the discipline evades me. I could bring up my notes. I apologize. But the trouble is, you look at it, and JTMMA saying Hadis Ibragimov is showing the same pacing issue. That's the thing. Like, Dolidze, when he fights, he pushes forward, and he throws a lot of power punches. And it's kind of wild because, like, he'll bait his opponents on, which is not a good thing at 205 in the UFC when you're facing like really good competition. Like, I wouldn't want to see him do that against like even Nikita Krylov would be a tough test. Like, even Johnny Walker, like if Roman Dolidze throws a couple of dirty hooks and then he's baiting Johnny Walker on, he's going to get caught with a knee up the middle or something. We've seen it where he's fought good competition on the regional scene. Like, I know you might discount some fights here and there, but the win over Michael Pasternak was a big one. The spinning back fist. The win before that, Eder D'Souza, that was a good one. But before that, we're talking that, like, fights where you get nervous. Like 2 years and 7 months ago against a guy who was making a debut. 3 years ago against a guy who's 2-1. So it's really tough to tell what he has. The one thing I will say with Roman Dolidze, if he gets in trouble when he's on the feet, he has a jiu-jitsu background that's really, gonna catch people off guard. He's competed on the regional scene at ADCCs, not like the big global ones, but Oceania. He's won different grappling events in the past. He won like FILA 2013, which was something that used to exist. But yeah, I see Roman Dolidze winning this fight. I don't see Hadis Ibragimov getting it. It's one of those ones where it's light heavyweight, so anything could happen. But I think you're probably safe with the old Roman Dolidze. Devin Brown saying Ibrahimov's ground game is what has me thinking he could pull this off. Dolidze has a good ground game. It just depends on who has a good gas tank in this one. James Lake saying can't really get a read on this one, so staying away from it. That one's fair too. Jay saying if there's a knockdown, who's it going to be? I think Dolidze in that case. Sunflower State Sporting. I mean, come on. We don't need that there. Come on. Let's go up a little bit. Randy saying thanks for your channel, Craig, and for bringing the MMA community together. Listen, I look forward to this like all week. And I know Matt and I make the prediction videos. We have Early Stoppage, the podcast. We have the recap shows. We're doing a lot of neat stuff with Fight Night Picks, and I'm always trying to change it up here and there and having fun. And I really appreciate everybody for tuning in. So I just want to say that before I continue on. I got about 20 minutes left so we can get into the main card. So let's do it and rip through these fights. Flyweight is on fire. You've got Alexandre Pantoja taking on Askarov. I was one of those guys that was super high on Askarov when he was with ACB. Got a win by Twister. Checking it in the chat. Sam Myers saying Askar got this one in the bag. And so on and so forth. The trouble I have, Askarov is one of those guys that'll whip out looping shots, and he can land, and then he gets you in trouble when you're on the ground. But Alexandre Pantoja has hung with some of the best guys at 25 for a long time. The only 2 losses that he has so far in the UFC, Dustin Ortiz, and like you might say, well, Dustin Ortiz isn't in the UFC anymore, so it doesn't matter. Man, he's a good fighter. He's a really good fighter. So he was one of those guys that you had to worry about because Ortiz hits really hard. Pantoja losing a decision there, and he lost to Deiveson Figueiredo, who's fighting for the title tonight. So, you got to say what you got to say there. Vokua, hopefully I'm pronouncing that properly. You're going Askarov. JTMMA's going Askarov. A lot of people saying it's pick'em. Some people saying Pantoja by knockout. I think Pantoja has all the tools to get the win here. Not going to play that game on the ground with Askarov. And it's tough, man. Like King Crab saying Askarov's overrated. He had a draw, and I get it. I thought, like being a big guy on Askarov on the way up, I thought that he was going to beat Moreno. I thought Moreno won that fight. I know it was a draw. I thought Moreno won that one. And for me, I think Moreno could easily be champion by the end of this year. If he fights Figueiredo, that's a close one as I slam my keyboard. Apologies for that. Alex Rojas pointing out Pantoja's too durable with the skills. Blues fan 1700 saying Pantoja's on a different level. I think so. I'm going to stick it with Pantoja. So going all the way through, quick recap. I got Spivak, Zarukian, Gordon, Alvarez, Dawson, Dolidze, Pantoja, and then we move into the next fight. And let me tell you this. The whole Molly McCann thing, that's a tough one. First last saying Pantoja is a lock. You're never going to hear me say lock ever again. Women's flyweight is the toughest division to try and get a read on. You can watch as much fight tape as you want. So let's talk about this one. Ariane Lipski, she lost to Joanne Calderwood. She lost to Molly McCann. She had moments against Molly McCann in the first round. McCann had a cut. She lost that fight 30-27, all 3 judges. She lost to Joanne Calderwood, but again, that's the first one out there. Then she beat Isabel de Padua. And if you go in and you just look at the stats, she beat the brakes off of de Padua. But let's kind of, pump the brakes a little bit because Lipski was supposed to be taking on Veronica Macedo. Macedo pulled out the week of the fight, so on day's notice, de Padua stepped in. De Padua weighed in at 130.5 pounds at 125. And Lipski beat her, and Lipski looked great. Her hand speed was good. Her combinations were good. Her ground game was nah. And it could happen 21 making fun of me, and that's fair. And Blues fans saying it's a bathroom break. And King Crab saying I don't bet on women. But this is one of those ones that just stay away from it. Like JTMMA saying I'm on Lipski, but I have no confidence in that pick. If you want to come back and give me the old clap back in the comments, big whoop. I mean, you're not hurting my feelings. Devin Brown is saying going with Luana Carolina. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Ariane Lipski has a decent game off her back. She won't just sit there. She can do good damage on top with her ground and pound. That's the word I'm looking for. And she has good boxing. She really does. And she has all right footwork. But Luana Carolina, on the other hand, has good Muay Thai. I mean, if you look at her debut, it was a tough fight for her. I mean, she was fighting Priscilla Cachoeira. Not that great. But you look at the way that fight went. And Carolina, while her percentages were good in terms of striking, if you watch it, there were a lot of wild looping shots. As Mutar Hussein says, she would kick your butt. She would kick my butt. I know, they all would. They're fighting in the UFC, and I'm not. I'm sitting behind a keyboard. But Luana Carolina, if it gets into the clinch, really good shot at beating Lipski. Really, she has good knees. She can get herself into some good positions. Jake is saying, will Carolina finish Lipski? What do I think? What round? I'm going to stay away from this one. Don't ask. I know Matt and I, we both picked Ariane Lipski to win. It is the least confident pick that I have. But if Ariane Lipski can push a pace, and if she can really kind of string together some combinations, she should be able to get the win. I'd just be wary because Luana Carolina has good kicks to legs, good body kicks, the good Muay Thai, this and that. It's tough. It's a really tough one. So, like I said, I'm going to go with Lipski, but I could certainly see Luana Carolina winning this one. And again, if you want to clap back, you can. Toast saying you got a podcast, Early Stoppage with Fight Night Picks. Yes, we do have a podcast. And I'm going to do a better job with the website and with the podcasting. It's on Spotify. It's on iTunes. It's all over the place. But we're trying to make some changes with Fight Night Picks because this thing's starting to, get a little squirrely and grow quite a bit. Next fight, Marc Jaqcacie taking on Rafael Fiziev. This is a fight where I'd be excited to see what everybody's thinking. Ghostface Gaming saying wouldn't touch this one with a barge pole. Hopefully you're talking about the fight between Carolina and Ariane Lipski. But in this one, Marc Jaqcacie Fiziev. You look at Fiziev in his debut, he took on Magomed Mustafayev. I'm incredibly high on Magomed Mustafayev. This is a guy that's like Muslim Salikov light. Like, he'll throw the spinning kicks. He can kind of do everything very well. And I know you might not be high on Muslim Salikov because that fight, between him and Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos was a close one. I know it was. But I really think Magomed Mustafayev has a high ceiling. I thought in his last fight it was really close against Brad Riddle, who I also hold in really high regard. So I'm going to whip it into the chat and see what you guys are saying. Matt Fox saying, love how people here hang on every pick you make. It's good and it's bad, Matt. It's good and it's bad. Toast saying Jaqcacie all day. Mutkar saying, keep doing your thing. You're going to pop one day for sure, bro. I appreciate it. It could happen 21 this fight. Hopefully that wasn't too loud in the mic. A lot of people taking Marc Jaqcacie. Kick's good saying fading this. I understand you. This is one of the fights that, I like in terms of my picks. I feel fairly confident. I know Fiziev has trained at some good gyms in the past. Tiger Muay Thai. Marc Jaqcacie spent time in England. He spent time at ATT. The thing is, Marc Jaqcacie's taken on a really good, solid competition in the UFC. I know he had the 3-fight losing streak, but Jakar Close is tough. Dan Hooker's really tough. And so is Nassar at Hackpress, who's on a good trajectory until he lost his last one. Then he beat Joe Duffy. Then he beat groovy Lando Venata. Lando Venata is tough to try and get a read on, and you can tell that because he's a real awkward striker. Rafael Fiziev, on the other hand, he is a good striker. Don't get me wrong. But you beat Alex White in the UFC, and it doesn't really tell me a lot about your entire trajectory. You got finished in his first fight, and it's tough. So I'm going to try and see what you guys are saying. It could happen 21, Bone Crusher. James Davies saying Marc taking it easy. UFC betting experience Marc. Max Murphy, Jaqcacie decision. And we continue on through. Randy Guerrero saying Fiziev. I like that. Toast saying Marc's calf kicks are on the next level. Frank saying Jaqcacie output too low. I don't do DraftKings, so I will say that. And Ace of Sports, Marin saying Tiger Muay Thai is where Shevchenko fights. There's a lot of good fighters that train out of Tiger Muay Thai. I mean, Alexander Volkanovski spent some time there, and so on and so forth. A lot of good fighters from there. So we continue on. Mukhtar saying Rafael is the beast. I get it, but yeah, my favorite comment here, Blues fan 1700 saying after losses, Jaqcacie's getting better. I agree. Jackie saying Fiziev is going to school him. Grungio saying Fiziev. Yeah, I think Jaqcacie's going to win this one fairly easily. So that's my pick there. We get 10 minutes left for two really good fights. Jack Hermansson taking on Kelvin Gastelum. This is a tough one, guys. Like, Matt took Kelvin Gastelum. Power to you. This really is the biggest coin flip of the card. I honestly believe that. I mean, yeah, Lipski and Carolina is. This is one where If you pick Hermansson, I agree. If you pick Gastelum, you can make a good enough argument. And I think, I'm not going to, freak out if you pick Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum, a lot of people are just in their mind going, man, he had an awesome fight against Israel Adesanya. I want to say Anderson Silva, but Israel Adesanya. It was a fight of the year. It was awesome. It was a really good one. Bubba is saying that Kelvin Gastelum is an all-around great fighter. Nothing he can't do. He marches forward. The thing that I like about Kelvin Gastelum, and it's something that we brought up lately because you've had some of the best pure boxers in MMA fighting recently. You had Dustin Poirier. You had Calvin Kattar. Kelvin Gastelum, and I don't know if it's because their names kind of sound a little similar, the first names, but Kelvin, and Dustin have really good boxing. Kelvin, if he's fighting from southpaw, he gets right into the pocket. He can throw great, nice uppercuts, nice combinations, little dirty leg kick. Jack Hermansson, though, is squirrely, and he's awkward, and he's a tough guy to fight, and you've seen that. And a lot of people were fairly disappointed, I guess, in his last fight, but let me tell you this. Jared Cannonier is not an easy guy to fight. I mean, he beat Anderson Silva, and I get it. Anderson Silva is not the old Silva that he used to be. And Frank is saying Gastelum beats old Brazilians. Here's the thing where, if you asked me about this fight, asked me about this 2 years ago, I would have said Kelvin Gastelum easy, by far, hands down, not even close. Jack Hermansson went on a gosh darn run before he lost his last fight. And I know the Talis Ladies fight, he was losing until he won it, but Josh Emmett was losing to Michael Johnson before he knocked him out, and Josh Emmett knocked out Shane Burgos too, or won by TKO. So we continue on. He beats Talis Ladies. It was a decision. He beats Gerald Meerschaert, submits him. Well, Gerald Meerschaert's a submission artist. He beats David Branch, submits him. David Branch wasn't good his second time around the UFC, not really, but he's really adept on the ground. And then he beat Jaqcacie, and to me that means a lot. So I like in the comments what Grungio said. Honestly, most of the fights on this card could go either way, and that's why it's so good. I think so. First last going with Gastelum. Toast saying Cannonier's a heavyweight. That's crazy that he's fighting at middleweight and having success. And Devin Brown saying Gastelum actually looks better now than in the picture too. And he probably does. I mean, this is an old picture, right? So I'm going to go with Jack Hermansson to win this one. And I know this is it's going to sound stupid. Chris Weidman back almost 3 years ago on Long Island, big fight. Weidman's hometown guy. He submitted Kelvin Gastelum, so it can be done. And he submitted it by arm triangle choke, which is your classic wrestler submission. Then we go Gastelum's win. He knocks out Bisping, but Bisping just got knocked out a couple weeks before by GSP, and he got beat pretty bad. Then he beat Jaqcacie in a fight that, did he beat Jaqcacie? I thought he lost that one. Then he lost to Adesanya, awesome fight. And then he lost to Darren Till, split decision. It was a close fight. But yeah, that's a tough one. And I get it if you don't want to touch this one. I totally agree with you. Just my 2 cents saying Hermansson's a good fighter. If Hermansson loses, he loses, and he's going to fight one of those 10 to 15 guys. And then if you look on the opposite side, if Gastelum loses, well, what do? Do you drop to 70? Can he drop to 70? Who does he fight at 185? I don't know. Johnny Picks MMA saying wrong pick, Kelvin by KO. First last saying hardest fight to pick in a while. It's a great one. And Toast saying Jaqcacie won, watch it this morning. I thought so too. So I'm going to go with Jack Hermansson, but I can definitely see if you're going with Kelvin Gastelum, and that's why this fight card is so good, because there's so many different ones that could go either way. So I picked Hermansson, Matt picked Kelvin Gastelum, and if you're following at home, a lot of people call us left guy, right guy. I'm left guy, Craig Allen FNP. I've done stuff for the Body Lock with who else? Loudmouth MMA. I used to write for MMA on Point. I've done a couple of different things. So we continue on and we look at our main event of the evening, the rematch between Deiveson Figueiredo and Joseph Benavidez. Let me know what you're thinking down below in the comments. I'm going to bring it up on Tapology just to see what people were thinking in terms of the voting there, so we can get a good idea. Out of 2,745 picks on Tapology, 79% going Figueiredo, 80% going by knockout. And over on Tapology, another big favorite, minus 230, Deiveson Figueiredo. I've got Deiveson Figueiredo in this fight. I don't see how it goes any different than the first one. I know there was the clash of heads, and Benavidez complained about it, and I get it. It's just tough for both of these guys. I mean, they're older guys. Danny D saying Joe is emotional / sadistic, but Figueiredo's smaller now. I hear you, and I appreciate the super chat, Danny D, always hitting us up and really supporting the channel, and there couldn't be anything better than that for us. So I appreciate that, Danny D. Volkua saying the uncrowned champion. It could happen. 21 saying lock of the night. Man, do not ask me for a lock of the night. I appreciate the super chat. I'll get to that as we continue on. But lock of the night came to bite me in the behind on Wednesday night. So Matthew Knapp saying Figueiredo looked tiny. Grungio saying Benavidez by points. Gastelum hasn't beat anybody in the prime. I mean, we could go back to 70 and figure out guys that he beat in the prime. A lot of people are going with Figueiredo. Figueiredo's such a good fighter, 25. I mean, he's sneaky on the ground. His hands are quick. He's got a lot of power, and you won't find guys with that much power at 25 like you have with Figueiredo. And if you look at his record over his last 5, he lost the decision to Formiga, and I know what Formiga looks like now. A year ago, kind of getting up there, kind of fighting good fighters, and he hasn't been as good lately. But you look at Figueiredo, beats Pantoja in an all-out slobber knocker, beats Tim Elliott by submission, beats Benavidez, and it's weird to get a win over a guy like that in Tim Elliott to get a title shot, but it is what it is. Let's get back into the chat really quick. We got about 5 minutes left. Just my 2 cents saying several great flyweight, I'm assuming, not featherweight fights. Yeah, flyweight fights. I agree with you. Chad David Dowell saying Spivak. Martial arts fan saying Hermansson by sub is a good play. Toast saying Figueiredo is a lock. I really do think that Figueiredo is going to win this one. I don't see Jose Benavidez winning this, and Mukhtar makes a great point. Locks are meant to be unlocked. You're right, they are. That's why you have keys. So that's a good one. And I get it. Chad David Dowell saying, you know, a little sussy with Figueiredo weighing in, but it is what it is. So let's just whip it back on up there. You get a full look at the card. I'm going to go over the rest of my picks. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll summarize this one and send everybody packing, and hopefully you can pay attention to the fights at home. Matthew Knapp, love the channel. Figueiredo will probably win, hoping Joe B. I appreciate you with the super chat. That's awesome. And, man, I'm having a lot of fun with this. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. Now, let's whip through this. I'll try and get into the comments in the last 4 minutes. So, to recap, I've got Spivak over Felipe. I've got Zarukian over Hamos. I've got Gordon over Al-bazi. That's a great fight. You're not going to want to miss that one. I've got, let's see, I've got Jackson over Johns. I've got Alvarez over Duffy. That's my big underdog pick of the night, and I think that's a pretty good one. I got Dawson over Narimani. Deiveson over Ibragimov. That's a weird one, but I think he's going to be able to get it done even off the layoff. Pantoja over Askarov. That should be a fun one. Your coin flip of the night that I really can't get a read on, even though all I do is watch fight tape, and I've watched a lot on Lipski and Carolina. Andrew's saying, thank you, left guy. Thank you, Andrew. But I'm going with Lipski. That's such a close fight. Like, I would stay away from that one. Let some, wild person collect on that. But I'm not confident in that one. So let that one be known. I've got Jaqcacie over Fiziev. I've got Hermansson over Gastelum, another close one. And then I've got Figueiredo over Benavidez. So lots of really good fights out there. Blues fan asking for my top 3. There's a lot of people asking for my top 3. I'll throw them out there and we'll see what happens. King Crab saying thanks. I appreciate that. Let me see. If I'm going to make the top 3 ones, and Mukhtar making another really good point, so I appreciate you. This channel's gone insane since January, so I just want to say thanks to everybody. And Dennis, I'm new to this chat, and I'm new to this chat, and it's top notch. I appreciate it, Dennis. Like that it really means the world to me for you guys saying this and for you guys tuning in. So I really do appreciate it. You want my top 3? I like Figueiredo over Benavidez. I like Dawson over Narimani. It's a tough one, though. I mean, Narimani's never been submitted, but Dawson's a big fighter. And I know this one, again, it's at 50. And if I went with one more, I'd say Deiveson over Ibragimov. That's a close one. So it should be a really good one. 2 minutes to count down. 1 minute until the card starts. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. I hope you have a great time tonight. I hope you enjoy the fights. We're going to have a recap show coming out tomorrow. We're going to have the podcast, early stoppage, so make sure you check back in for those. We'll have fight picks up for Till and Robert Whitaker. Those are going to be coming up early on in the week, so just my 2 cents. Chad David Dowell, you're darn tootin'. Everybody likes the Canadian sayings, even though that one's not the biggest Canadian saying. And let's throw it back over to ringsidebeerstore.com. Check them out. Ringsidebeerstore.com. Use promo code FNP. You can get 25% off. They're great stuff. They've got shirts. They've got tap handles. They've got some awesome stuff. You're supporting the channel there too. And, we'd love to go full time with this stuff. And, it's all thanks to you guys. So enjoy the fights. They're starting right now. And as we always say with Fight Night picks, let's get into it.
It's time
for 15 minutes of non-stop MMA, tackling the biggest news in the sport. Head into the chat and let us know how you feel. Live from Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, here's your host, Craig Allen.